Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Ventura County Climate Emergency Council meeting held on December 21st, 2021. This will be our last meeting of the year. And we're just going to stand by for a moment or two to let people join us before we get started. Welcome, everyone. I'm just going to go ahead and update the co-host privileges for our VCCEC members. And I see that we've had two more join us in just a moment, last couple of moments, and then we'll be ready to get started. All right. So it looks like we have the majority of our council members here. We're at 4 after 12. Chair Schnapp, if you'd like to kick us off by calling the meeting to order, staff's ready on our side.
Great. Okay. Thank you so much, Clay. So we call the meeting to order of the Ventura County Climate Emergency Council. This is a regular meeting scheduled here for Tuesday, December 21st, 2021, effectively at 12:04. And a special notice here is that in response to the declared state and local emergencies due to the novel coronavirus and limited public access to the Hall of Administration, consistent with the Governor's Executive Order N-29-20, this Ventura County Climate Emergency Council meeting will be conducted via Zoom and telephonically. And so let's go ahead and have a roll call, please.
Okay. Councilmember White.
Here.
Councilmember Ferris.
Here.
Chair Schnapp.
Here.
Councilmember Kessley. Councilmember Ramirez.
Here.
Thank you. Councilmember Ontiveros.
I am here.
Councilmember Garola.
Here.
Councilmember Hernandez. Councilmember Chavez.
Here.
Thank you. Councilmember Baldwin.
Here.
All right. With that, we have a quorum in attendance and we're ready for the next item.
Okay, so let's move on to item number 3, the Pledge of Allegiance. And normally I call on the council members to recite the pledge or to lead us in the pledge. So Daniel, Vice Chair, can you do that for us, please?
Absolutely, Madam Chair. If you all join me in reaffirming our allegiance to our flag by repeating, I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
Thank you. And let's move on to item number 4 then, the approval of the minutes from our last meeting that was held on November 23rd, 2021. So does anyone care to make that motion? So I see Councilmember Garola making the motion. Is there a second?
I second that motion.
Okay, Councilmember Ontiveros seconded. Could we have a roll call, please?
Councilmember White.
Aye.
Councilmember Ferris,
Yes.
Chair Schnapp,
Yes.
Councilmember Ramirez. Councilmember Ramirez, if you responded, you may still be on mute.
Yes.
Thank you. Councilmember Ontiveros,
Yes.
Councilmember Garola,
Aye.
Councilmember Chavez.
Abstain as I wasn't here.
Thank you. Councilmember Baldwin.
So I have a question. I watched the meeting on recorded and I read everything, but I wasn't here. So should I abstain or can I say yes, because it looks like what was said at the meeting is in the minutes? Maybe it's easier to abstain.
It may be easier and simpler to abstain since you were not here.
Okay, I will.
Thank you. All right. And with that, the motion passes.
Okay, thank you so much. All right, so let's move on to item number 5. We get to public comments, and these are public comments for items not on the agenda. We'll go ahead and allow those that are attending this meeting but want to make public comments for this commission to do so now. You could raise your hand or take yourself off of mute. And let me see if I can take a look at any of the others on the screen here. I don't see anyone raising their hands.
And staff has not received any emails or other correspondence indicating desire to speak
Okay.
on and comment.
Okay, for public comments on items on the agenda, we'll take them as we go through the agenda items. So with that, then let's go into the correspondence agenda items, number 6 through 11. And these are presented to this body for information, and these items don't require any action. And staff may refer these items to county agencies and departments for acknowledgement, investigation, reporting back, direct action, or responses appropriate. And reports back to this group, the Climate Emergency Council, may appear on the regular agenda for action or informal purposes as appropriate. So item number 6 is correspondence from Councilmember White on December 3rd, 2021. Item number 7 is correspondence from Councilmember Baldwin on December 9th, 2021. Item 8 is correspondence from Councilmember Baldwin on December 9th, 2021. There's 2 of them there for that day. Item number 9 is correspondence from Councilmember White on December 10th, 2021. Item number 10 is correspondence from Councilmember White on December 13th, 2021. And item number 11 is correspondence from Councilmember White on December 13th, 2021. Any questions? Yes, Councilmember Ontiveros.
May I make a suggestion, please, to staff? When you email us these, can you correspond them to the numbers on the agenda? Because I have a hard time scrolling up and down, figuring out which number goes to which thing, because I also wanted to make comments on some of the stuff that I've read, which I think is wonderful. Thank you to Councilmember Baldwin and White. And so that might make it a little bit easier, because I don't know which number belongs to which, because I really wanted to make a comment on one of the things I read.
Staff will be happy to do that. We can have individual cover pages in the agenda packet for each correspondence item.
Or just the number, like, I don't know which one goes to existing buildings electrification strategy. I don't know which number that is.
That's understood, and we'll be happy to mark out which ones are related to the agenda, to each individual agenda item. And so that for us, as staff, the easiest way to do that is going to be with a cover sheet.
Oh, okay, thank you. And may I make a comment about that?
Of course.
Okay,
Yes.
so that is like a dream come true. That plan, Berkeley is amazing for doing that. That it's like the whole thing, the jobs, the technology, the electrification, using our solar energy, training young people. If we could adopt something like that, that would be amazing for our community. That is just, and then, you know, they also go into sustainability and equity, and it's just a really, I mean, it's long, I only skimmed it, but I think our community, if we could head that way, we would very, very positive. I really appreciate that Councilmember White shared that document with us. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. And then I see Councilmember White's hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm don't recall the details of what Dick Baldwin sent or forwarded to the council, but my recollection or my summary, I guess, of what I forwarded to Clay to distribute to everybody was what Dina just talked about, and that's electrification of existing buildings. I know the county's working on a REACH code for new buildings, and maybe we'll get an update from Clay or Dave Ward on that. But Berkeley is doing that for looking at existing buildings and eliminating natural gas combustion and the consequent CO2 emissions. The other article had to do with methane, you know, which is another major greenhouse gas emission that we need to address. So I hope you all have had a chance to read those articles. If you haven't, I recommend that you do so. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments or questions? Yes, go ahead, Councilmember Ontiveros.
Yes, and with the new technology that they can actually pinpoint where the methane leaks are coming from, it would be awesome if as a county we could figure out where the methane leaks are in our county. And I mean, it would be a tremendous opportunity for someone to start a business. I mean, I'm not a business person, unfortunately, but that would be so lucrative for somebody to start a business that all they did was cap the leaking methane. My goodness, that would be a great opportunity. But if we could pinpoint those leaks and find a way to cap them, that's a great opportunity, not only for us as people, but the environment and somebody who really wanted to make some money.
Thank you. Yes, Councilmember Baldwin.
So there are companies making money doing that. They did it when I was working at APCD. They did it a lot. They still do it. Part of the problem, the big part of the problem actually, is abandoned pipes, oil wells that no one has responsibility for throughout the country, throughout California, and to some extent in Ventura County. What's needed is to have a mandate of some form or a big pot of money somewhere to hire these companies that do it. The money's there. I mean, not the money, but the jobs are there. People are doing this. Oil field service companies have been doing it probably 100 years. It's not a new thing. It's not a new trick. It's just somebody has to apply resources to it to actually do the work. And the problem is when you have something abandoned, there's no, the owner, there's no owner really. It's just kind of laying there on the land. And it's just, it's a tough, but the state needs to really do something. I think it's beyond the county, but maybe the county has authority to do, just to require cleanup. One of the things that's interesting is, oh man, I forget who it is now. It might be the Nature Conservancy or Environmental Defense Fund, but anyway, they've got a satellite program that's actually monitoring methane all around the country, all around the world, and they can spot what's going on around here. So, and that's getting improved all the time, where they're getting more focused on monitoring for methane, and they'll be able to identify many of the leaking areas in these oil fields, and they can point it out. But again, until there's someone with authority that says do it, clean it, it's going to be pretty tough to do. but it sure needs to be done.
Do we have that authority?
No. I don't think the county has that authority. You can have the attorneys look into it, but that's an interesting question. It does get into some land use issues. Clay might be able to sneak around on that a little bit. Air Pollution Control District only controls emissions from permitted sources. If equipment's abandoned and it comes off a permit, the Air Pollution Control District has zero authority. The state doesn't have a regulation on that yet. Whether or not the county can come up with an ordinance, that's beyond my knowledge. I honestly don't know. It's probably worth exploring.
Councilmember White.
Yeah, to respond to Dick's question there, whether the county has authority. Last year, the County Board of Supervisors did adopt some tough policies on oil and gas operations. I understand that they're being litigated, but the county did act to limit emissions from oil and gas.
I could be
But
wrong.
That it probably is better to be done by the state.
I think what they did was for active operations, not abandoned. Abandoned is just a big mess. Just a big mess. And it
Yeah, I
should be
think
done
it
by
was
the
more
state.
looking forward than looking back.
Yeah.
Any other comments? Yes, Councilmember Ramirez.
So just piggybacking on this conversation, I wonder who could we have come in to our council to talk to us about the abandoned sites and exactly what is happening in those instances. What can we do? What can we push forward? Because just saying, oh well, we don't know, this doesn't seem like where this conversation needs to end, but rather this is where the conversation begins.
Maybe that's subject for like a special presentation. Yeah. Okay.
That and also that was interesting, Council Member Baldwin, where you spoke about the maps and showing the leaking of methane. Is it possible for either yourself, or if it's too much, if it's not something that it's feasible for you, for someone on staff to acquire that mapping?
Well, one of the links I sent was for the Methane Moment show, which included some of that information. Additionally, there are maps, I believe, that can be obtained. I haven't really tried to find a map of a specific area. Let's say the Ventura Avenue or something like that. I've just looked at regional maps, but there are maps, and their maps are being developed all the time as the satellites fly over, and I get more and more information, and the satellites are getting better.
It looks like a member of the general public, Don Price, said that the maps are online. Okay. Thank you. All right, any other comments?
So for the maps are online, who among us will be responsible for getting those maps in front of the rest of us so that we can have a conversation around it and start to look at it, and at the same time have a presentation around what's happening with the abandoned wells?
Yes, Councilmember Ontiveros.
I see in the comments section that Kathleen Wheeler said Sea Frog is well informed on the topic of abandoned wells, and maybe we could reach out to them to do a presentation for us.
I second that motion. I know it's not a motion, but I think they are a great resource. They've been doing a lot of work on the subject.
You can make it a motion. I motion to have the staff reach out to them to make a presentation to us.
Yeah, so we can take that up on 16 on the future agenda items for sure. Okay, thanks. Anyone else? for any of the correspondence that's gone out to the CEC?
Well, the other thing I would add from staff is that staff can certainly reach out to CFROG, and you guys as a group, this council can particularly at I think agenda item 16, when those items come up for future agenda items, if that's something you want to specify. But also if we want to look at the data that's being used with what CFROG does to discuss oil wells and status and things like that, we can go straight to those data sources from those agencies. But also if this council wants to speak to community groups and whatnot, then that's also at your discretion. So we're happy to look into that and make sure we have some of the right information. I think that Councilmember Baldwin had also mentioned CARB, had mentioned APCD. We might consider looking at some others with permitting authority where some of that data tends to stem from those activities like CalGEM and whatnot. The county's authority tends to be focused in areas such as land use, permitting, siting, and those sorts of things, but it may not be enforcement. But we can look into that to a greater extent and try and make sure we have some information come back.
Okay, thank you, Clay. All right, so with that, then let's go on to our regular agenda, and item number 12 is the resolution authorizing the remote teleconferencing meetings for VCCEC for a 30-day period pursuant to Government Code Section 54953 Subdivision E of the Ralph M. Brown Act.
Chavez
Move
moves.
approval.
Who was Councilmember Chavez and Councilmember Baldwin?
I moved
Yes.
approval. But
Okay,
I'll second. That's fine.
second that. Okay, all right. Can we have a roll call, please, or any discussion? All right, so no discussion, so go ahead with the roll call.
Councilmember White,
Yes.
Councilmember Ferris,
Yes.
Chair Schnapp,
Yes,
Councilmember Ramirez,
Yes.
Councilmember Ontiveros,
Yes.
Councilmember Garola,
Yes.
Councilmember Chavez,
Aye.
Councilmember Baldwin.
yes,
Motion passes.
okay, thank you. So let's move on to item number 13. This is an update from the County Executive Office staff.
Right, thank you. This will be a relatively short one. The only meetings that we had on record of our technical or our temporary advisory committees were 2 meetings of the Transportation Commission. They did a site visit to the Gold Coast Transit District and a tour of the facilities on December 8th. And they did a virtual meeting on December 15th. No other TAC activities were reported over the course of the month since the last meeting. The Sustainability Division has brought on a new staff member who's watching. She's in the audience today. And so that is Morel Vargas. And so Morel joins us. She's going to be focused on climate action plan implementation. She's not assigned to this program and to the Climate Emergency Council. She's typically going to be working on other things, but she will be a resource that's going to be available as needed if that's where some of your inquiries and those sorts of things go. So in particular, she's going to be helping with some of the interagency coordination, accounting, transparency, and monitoring associated with CAP implementation across multiple agencies. So the Sustainability Division is now kind of hosting and leading that component across the County of Ventura's kind of family of agencies. And so that's what she'll be working on, as well as other things. So we're really pleased to have her as part of the team. And then the other thing I wanted to mention was that we did have the first meeting of the county's, this may have happened shortly before the last meeting, but I wanted to bring it up because I didn't before, but what we're calling our CAP team. And so that is staff points of contact from each of the agencies that have climate action plan related programs assigned to them. So we have that as an internal working group that's responsible for knowing and reporting the status and then later the metrics associated with the various programs that are affiliated with the CAP. So that's what I have for our updates. And I know we have Sue Hughes and Alejandra here. So if either of you have something you want to add to the update, you are welcome to.
Nothing else. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So that's it for that agenda item from us, unless there are questions from the council.
Are there
Or
any questions
public.
from the council members? Seeing none, so thank you, Clay, for that report. Let's move on then to item number 14. And this is our guest speaker, Amy Ryder, regarding GHG emissions reduction opportunities in buildings and other sectors. And so, Amy, I believe you're here. And do we have a presentation like a PowerPoint file? Okay, great. All right. Thank you, Amy. Welcome.
We do. So once Amy gets on board here, but I'll say that it's been really just super easy to talk to Amy, and I've spoken with her a couple of times leading up to this. So she's one of the folks that has been working, particularly our 3C REN folks that work on energy efficiency and building emissions are familiar with Amy and her work and the organization she works with. So I really hope everyone's looking forward to a good presentation. Hopefully it's very informative and leads to good questions following that too. So Amy, take it away and let me know if you need me to help with any screen sharing or anything.
Thank you so much, Clay and council members. Really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you all today. And I will admit that it's such a pleasure to jump into a meeting like this with such a knowledgeable group of people. So I'm going to walk through my presentation and apologize in advance if it's too simplistic for some of you who are clearly well versed in these topics, and also offer the opportunity to talk through some more complicated things as we progress into the conversation portion. So I'm Amy Ryder. I'm the local government policy lead for an organization called the Building Decarbonization Coalition. And so because of that focus, I definitely will be talking mostly about buildings, and as I was asked to do, but I imagine there are many of the other opportunities that are on your radar as the Climate Emergency Council there in Ventura County. The Building Decarbonization Coalition, just by way of introduction, is a nonprofit, member-based, multifaceted, all kinds of stakeholders are involved in this process. So just so you understand, our membership includes manufacturers of electric equipment. It includes utilities. It includes local governments, NGOs, architects, engineers, just a wide swath of folks who are working on electrification across the country. And by way of introduction for myself, I just wanted to share, because in my conversations with Clay, it's come up often, the fact that I live in Sonoma County. And so there are lessons absolutely that we are all learning together in these more rural parts of our state that I think will translate into some of our conversation today. And I also have some background in emergency response, and I'm seeing the connection of my two worlds of my volunteer life as an emergency responder and my professional life in climate science come together in interesting ways, and look forward to sharing some of those with you. So really, this is not going to be long, but I will go over some of the basics here of why we're focusing on electrification, some of the elements of new construction that have already even been addressed in this meeting thus far, some talk about existing buildings, and then some other opportunities that perhaps are a little more out there as things that the county can consider. So just by way of background for this whole conversation, it sounds like, again, most folks probably are aware of this, but in case you're not, in California today, buildings are about a quarter of our total greenhouse gas emissions. And they're really continuing to be a focal point for more and more of the industry, partially because they last so long. And the transition times really are much longer than for vehicles, for example. And so that's really part of why this focus matters, and planning matters too. We talk about electrification largely because we have figured out how to electrify and make electricity clean. And as of yet, there is no science that I have seen that makes gas as clean or carbon neutral as the electricity sector is already well on its way to achieving. So that's really why electrification seems to be the leading solution and the lowest cost solution, rather than putting our money into research and development. It's something that we already have the technology for, and it's really a matter of deploying that technology into the various spaces. So just a very brief introduction to new construction. You've clearly heard a lot about REACH codes, and I'll talk about those because I do love them. But one of the biggest things that's happened recently is that the new energy code, the state of California, which adopts its energy code every 3 years, was just approved. It doesn't go into effect until January 1st of 2023, but it is considered the 2022 code. And there were some really big wins. So starting in 2023, more and more buildings were already making this transition for new construction to having electric baselines and looking at the actual emissions factors that go into sourcing those buildings with power. So those are things that are big changes that are happening at the state. There's also some new regulations that have fuel-based differences, explicitly different levels of ventilation that are required depending on how you're cooking. So when if you're cooking with a gas range versus an electric stove, you actually have to ventilate more in order to improve the air quality and to avoid some of the health implications of using gas as a cooking fuel. And there's also big indications from the state that more grid interaction, more demand responsiveness, and looking at more and more at refrigerants that we use are all coming down in future code cycles for new construction. So just want you to know that this is a work in progress, and we're continuing to make that progress. Now, in the new construction world, we leverage that and we build on those building codes through REACH codes. Predominantly, historically, that has been the mechanism on which we could say this is the energy code and the local government wants to go beyond that. So we did in 2019 a legal analysis that actually showed what are the other opportunities. In addition to doing a REACH code, what else could local governments do to be able to take action on greenhouse gas emissions with regard to buildings? And this is the list that we came up with. So REACH codes, which again, we'll talk a little bit more about, build off of existing codes, the ability to prohibit gas infrastructure, which is often considered like Berkeley's gas ban. That's really just a prohibition of gas infrastructure. And then we get into some other categories that fit into less common, shall we say, at this point. So when I talk about REACH codes, I'm usually talking about the combination of REACH codes and prohibit gas infrastructure. And so far there have been 54 of jurisdictions of the state of California and 6 other states across the country who are taking action, starting to make these changes happen in their code. I will talk through each of these very briefly as well, because they probably will come up in conversation. So emissions limits on appliances is something that is being looked at through the air management districts, as well as through the Air Resources Board at a state level. The appliance burnouts are 2 local potential programs that haven't been tried yet, but are being considered by other local governments. And then we have community scale phase out, which is really looking at what point in time can and should a community actually turn off the gas service to either a neighborhood or their entire town. And then the greenhouse gas mitigation or carbon offset fees would be in a place where you didn't have a REACH code. You could impose a fee on anyone who still is using gas in new construction in order to have some sort of a fund to electrify another building, for example. And then we also have the project scale CEQA mitigation, which is a staff mechanism that they can use when deploying the Environmental Quality Act, and building emission standards, which is setting a target around the total emissions of an existing building and ramping them down over time. So we can get into some of those specifics, but I will say that, again, the most popular here have been REACH codes and prohibiting the gas infrastructure for new construction. So I won't get into too much of this detail because I think that you are all pretty well aware of what these options are. But again, the gas moratorium, all electric ordinances are the 2 things that the county is currently looking at now. There is a third option of the electric preferred ordinance, which effectively still allows for gas use in new construction, but gives a preference or some sort of benefit to any building that chooses not to. As far as I know, that's not on the table for Ventura County. And that's actually really common. This is a chart that just shows the breakdown of the 54 jurisdictions in California that have taken action so far. And most of them have opted for the all electric category, this blue one here at the bottom. So I wanted to spend some time on existing buildings because I hear more and more this is where people's interest is. So in terms of this chart, what we're starting to see is lower down on the chart, the things that are less common. So for example, the emissions limits on appliances, and again, I'll speak to that in just a moment in detail. We've had one city who's actually developed an ordinance on the replace on burnout, which would effectively say that if your water heater dies, when you go to replace it, you have to replace it with an electric water heater. That city was the city of Half Moon Bay, and they recently actually decided not to move forward with that particular ordinance, but the ordinance itself is out there and being circulated for others to take a look at and consider. Half Moon Bay did decide on setting a date, an end date for when their community would no longer have gas service to the entire city. They chose 2045 and they approved that at council last week. So that is something that they're doing. They happen to be at the end of a service line. And so it's a little bit easier of a problem than other communities that have multiple connections to their gas service, but they've set that date in writing and now they have to figure out how to do it. So that's their electrification charge in their city. And then we're seeing a lot of building emission standards for existing buildings when it comes to large commercial structures. New York City has passed an ordinance like this. There are a few other cities that are looking at implementing a building emission standard as well, but it works best where there is dedicated staff and large buildings that can take action. It does not work very well for smaller structures at this point in time. So I wanted to point out that there is one of the most exciting things in existing building space is this new reach code tool, which allows for local government staff or anybody who's interested to go and make their own ordinance and play with it and see what is cost effective in your region. So you can actually go onto this tool, the link is below, and type in your city, your county, and see what might be possible for an existing building ordinance to come up with a menu of options for new construction or even getting into retrofits and things. So it's a new tool that I just wanted to point out that exists. And for the uber nerdy of us, we get excited about this. So wanted to share with you as well. All right, so emissions limits on appliances. You may be more interested in what Ventura County can do, but I will point out that there are various agencies who are already making big changes when it comes to existing buildings and appliances. So this crazy acronym at the beginning, we pronounce BACMUD, that's the Bay Area Air Quality Management District. They have already, they're working on some standards. They haven't approved them, but they have posed that they would like to start embracing what are looking more and more to be electric technologies for water heating and space heating, going after Nox emissions. So nitrogen oxide emissions that come from burning gas is one of the air pollutants that is regulated by the air quality managers all over the state because it contributes to ozone, which contributes to smog. So Nox emissions are something that can be regulated by those different entities and are beginning to get down to the appliance level in so doing. And so BACMUD has proposed regulations. South Coast is looking at this as well. And meanwhile, the California Air Resources Board, CARB, actually is stating that they have a proposed scoping plan requirement that would also really limit the amount and the ability over the course of time to purchase gas appliances at large across the state. So these are things that are are in progress. There's definitely the ability to engage with these entities as you feel the need, but they're conversations that would change the way that we purchase appliances in our homes and buildings if they were to pass. Setting future dates of, as you can see here, for example, 2027 being the last time you could purchase a gas water heater in the state of California, for example. So again, these are all in progress. We don't know for sure what will get approved, but there is largely movement towards this electrification within the retail marketplace effectively. So other opportunities that I pulled these together because, again, have a very knowledgeable crowd here, and I thought it would be fun to talk through some things that I see. And oops, some of these are more or less urban, but not necessarily. So wanted to just talk through some opportunities that may be considered because they reduce greenhouse gases, but they also have other benefits. So for example, we've already seen this rise of parklets and parking space dining in many of our cities. And not only does that have the opportunity to really reduce carbon through getting people out of their cars, but it can help build community, slow streets. Some of these things that happen because of a global pandemic and actually could change our behaviors for the positive, strangely enough. We're also seeing a rise of sidewalk gardens and the ability for people to add beauty to their community while also sequestering carbon and breaking up some of the monotony of the paved environment. We've already talked about converting to electric. I'm a fan. And then you're already working pretty hard on resiliency and general planning, and kudos to the County of Ventura. This seems like you're pretty far along in this, but don't think it, I think it bears repeating. Things like placemaking art that can bring the community together and improve walkability by slowing traffic down, by adding art to intersections is something else that I just thought would be fun to talk through. And then we see these competing interests. I happen to be a really big fan of adaptive reuse, and especially right now, as we're seeing more and more office buildings go empty or changing their lease structures for a while, being able to modify our zoning codes to allow for more housing in those spaces is an opportunity that I find really promising. Allowing for more critical infrastructure to be built with microgrids, so giving that energy resilience as well as long-term sustainability of the microgrid itself. Probably less apt for a county, but certainly something that is critical in much of the state is just density bonuses to allow for more and smaller housing. Looking at the housing restrictions and how big a unit can be considered a habitable dwelling. And then purchasing policies and just shopping locally. It's something that I know we've talked about for decades at this point, but it never hurts to look local, shop local, and to have municipal policies that support those as well. Carbon farming is another topic that I personally think is really interesting. They've been studying this in the county of Marin for 15 years or so now, looking at the possibility of carbon sequestration matched with agricultural practices and opportunity to really use our agricultural neighbors and assets in new and unique ways. Something I think more counties can really take advantage of. And then of course, whatever we can do to electrify the existing county properties and your operations are all things that I'm a fan of. So that's it for my formal presentation. Hoping this sparks good conversation and perhaps even fun debate, but thank you for your attention.
thank you very much, Amy. Are there any questions, comments from the council members? Yes, Councilmember White and then Councilmember Ramirez.
Yes, Amy, thank you very much. This is a fabulous presentation you made, and I'm a big fan of what your group is doing around the state. I know we first met with respect to the REACH code development in the city of Ojai. And I understand that you're working or you've met with county planning staff working on the Ventura County REACH code that was approved in concept by the board last year. Excellent work you guys are doing. You mentioned that there are 54 jurisdictions in the state of California. Do you include Ventura County as one of those?
Yeah, to clarify, Ventura, I do not count yet. So only those cities that have fully adopted their ordinance are on my list as of yet.
Okay, great. And you mentioned on your one of your last sheets about electrifying county buildings. What counties are doing that? Do you know of some that are doing that already?
I'm trying to think of specific counties that are already in progress. Certainly the county of Marin is working on this. The county, city and county of San Francisco are actively doing. I suspect more are working on it and doing it quietly. There's not too many that have mandated that motion. Most folks are just working on it behind the scenes because it's cost effective to do so.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Councilmember Ramirez.
Amy, I want to thank you as well for your presentation. I also really appreciated the energy that you bring to this and the work that you're doing, but also just how the sense that I get is that there's so much momentum here to electrify the state of California, which is a leader in this country for leading on trends. So it almost seems like, regardless of where you stand on electrification, it's happening. It's happening. So we here in Ventura County can be at the forefront, or be not even the forefront because there's many that have already done so, but really start to push these concepts that are already happening earlier so that we don't have to wait till 2027 for these things to take to go into effect. So like, for example, I was really interested in the replacement burnout retrofit. And I'm going to look forward, do look forward to looking at that explore local energy codes. And I wonder if I were to put in Ventura County, if you could find something like that, like, you know, as a homeowner, when I have to make that decision, when I have to replace my current natural gas heater or whatever, my water heater, how much would it cost? Because, you know, that's what it comes down to for people, and the resistance, right, around the cost of that. I'm also really interested to know about, in Marin, you mentioned the carbon farming piece. You know, my background, I wrote a book that specifically looks at agriculture as a place for sequestering carbon and also saving water. So I'm very knowledgeable in this area, but not necessarily in terms of how the interplay between government and private farms are working together to push this concept forward, and how our government's offering incentives to help farmers to move, especially smaller regenerative farmers, to move forward on carbon farming, regenerative farming. So I just, you know, I think it's really great for us to have models and not reinvent things that are already happening, but just looking at, that's why I appreciate your your ability to look at the whole state and see what different communities are doing that are down the road from us, so that we could play some catch up here.
Okay,
So I guess my question first off is about the carbon farming and also the looking at the replacement burnout retrofit and talking a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so just to respond, so I don't know much about that interplay between the public-private partnership either, but the Marine Carbon Project is the resource that has been doing this work, and I would be interested to see what that can and that could turn into for Ventura in particular, but I don't have the details to answer that question either. But with regard to the replace on burnout, I will say that it's not easy to pass something that would require that. And the motion so far to date has been focused more on incentives and education. And so in fact, I really appreciate the opportunity to say this because I was remiss entirely at telling you that Switches On, which I'll put the link in the chat here momentarily, is a newly launched statewide resource that you can pick up the phone and talk to somebody about how to electrify and like how to plan your own home renovation if you wanted to do so. But it also has access to vetted contractors, rebates, and all of the things that you might need if you wanted to proactively take this effort to electrify.
Okay, thank you. And we have Councilmember Chavez. You have a few questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Amy, for the presentation. I have a few questions. Your presentation sparked a lot of questions, and I hope that was your motive behind your presentation today, was to spark a lot of questions. It sure did. So I personally, I live in the largest city in Ventura County, in the city of Oxnard. We also have a large low income to very low income families. One of the big things for me is ensuring that, my fellow residents are able to be raised up. And what I mean by that is having every opportunities to be able to enjoy the benefits as others. But at the same time, I have to also keep in mind that cost is a factor, and doing an undue burden on those residents is actually more harmful than it is helpful. So the first question that I have is in regards to the REACH program. You made a comment that 54 counties in the state of California, and I believe you said 3 to 4 states are also utilizing a similar program. How long have those programs been operational?
Okay, so it's 54 cities and counties, to be clear, not just counties in California that have passed some form of REACH code or gas moratorium. The first of those that was electrification specific was in 2019. So none of them are very old at this state.
Okay. And in the other states, you said that they had programs too. How long have those programs been running?
Those are all newer. California started it, as was suggested earlier.
Okay. So I'm very curious in regards to the data as far as how successful it actually is being. In California, we know that we have flex alerts because we don't have enough energy. We have rolling blackouts, and then our energy grid was threatened when the fire up north was raging wild. So I'm curious in regards to the data. Do you happen to have that data or a link so that I can actually view how successful those electrifications or moratoriums are going?
So I don't have a link where you can find centralized data about how it's going universally. What I can share with you is that a couple of things. Number one, all of these so far that are in place are about new construction. So they're frankly a very small share of the overall picture, both from a building stock perspective and from a greenhouse gas perspective. So either of those metrics are not terribly significant at this point in time, given that it's only been 2.5 years at this July of 2019 is really not that long ago when you're talking about construction. So there's not a lot of good data in regard to the moratoriums and the ordinances themselves. What I can say is that there are lots of existing all electric buildings that predate those rules and regulations. And I'll have to look to see what resource might be best to send you with that regard. There is a national website that actually highlights all electric buildings, but it's mostly commercial. And I don't recall what it is off the top of my head. But that's a place where buildings of all types are really kind of self-reporting that we're all electric and this is how we're operating. So it's pretty exciting from that regard. I want to respond to what was in an implied question on your part around PSPS and reliability of, what is it like to go all electric? Like, are we giving up something in response? And one thing I'll say is that Santa Rosa was one of the really early cities to impose an all electric requirement. And that was for a couple of reasons that actually speak to power reliability. Number one, new modern electric appliances are more efficient, but also modern gas appliances require electricity to operate. Pilot lights are no longer legal. So you actually have to have an electric start on all appliances. The only appliance that you could start during a power outage that is gas is a gas stove. But then your ventilation fan doesn't work. So there's some challenges for sure around this and reliability in general, but having a gas water heater in a power outage actually doesn't save you anything. You still are without hot water when the power is out. So the good news is that while reliability has been in question in recent time, that's not actually because we don't have enough electricity. Most of that is because of safety and because of some of the distribution challenges in the state of areas where the electrical grid is actually just constrained in that space. But it's not because we're unlike Texas, where they actually have a challenge of how much they can provide for their entirety of their grid. It's around constraints, and it's problems that are known and solvable actually pretty readily. We do have a couple years before we have to get there, but fortunately, these are also problems we don't have to contend with because we're not all going to be electrified tomorrow, even if we might want to be. So I hope that answers your question in part.
No, that was great. And I would beg a differ about 2019, how being so far. I think all of us will agree after this pandemic that 2019, when the world was normal, feels like forever. But on the other hand, here's my thing, and Councilmember Ramirez, she was kind of alluding to it in regards to costs. The cost for a home that isn't technically equipped for a electric water heater. How much are they going to have to take on now switching the infrastructure from the traditional gas water heater to now an electric water heater? What is it going to cost an individual in a multifamily units, such as apartment complexes? Are we, who ends up taking on that cost? Well, it ultimately is the tenants, because the landlords are going to pass that cost on to them. So do you happen to have rough numbers, the cost difference between having the infrastructure installed in an older home versus, I understand newer construction is a lot easier because you put it in there and it's ready to go. But in an older home, how much of a cost are people going to look at when they're having to switch to the electrification if their city or county end up going down that path?
Great question. So the reason that we've started with new construction is that it is just cheaper universally. With regard to existing buildings and retrofitting our buildings, the answer is not one size fits all by any stretch of the imagination. The good news is the operating cost is almost always better especially if you already have air conditioning. If you didn't have air conditioning before, there might be a slight additive cost because you now have air conditioning by using a heat pump, which does both. The upfront cost is the hard part. And unfortunately, I don't have a, in this situation, this is how much it would cost answer for you. What I can say is that the technology is close to parity for some of it, but higher cost for upfront for much of it right now. And installation costs are a little bit challenged depending on the experience of your contractor. So that's why Switches On exists, so that we have the rebates in place to partner with contractors to get them the training they need and to bring down the cost of the equipment. How much it will cost completely depends on so many factors, and each building, as you've already pointed out. I myself live in a building that was built in 1890. And so it has its own special personality. How much infrastructure do you have? And one of those big questions often is around the actual load of like how big is your electrical panel for that individual house? Because it was only in the 1960s that we increased a panel side from 60 amps to 100 amps. And today most houses built with a single family house is 200 amps. So there definitely are some constraints, and that's why those programs exist, to try to meet them, especially for renters, for low to moderate income people. But we have some time, and it is my personal belief that we will see cost parity happen within the next 5 years or so, pretty quickly, and then have a savings over time.
I appreciate that. Let me ask it now. When we talk about REACH program, we're going towards multifamily. We're not necessarily doing single family homes, and kind of single family homes is kind of an old, outdated thing. Now we're stepping away from that. I sit on the planning commission in Nox. We're pretty much stepping away from the single family homes. We're going more towards multifamily. These multifamily housing units, and you kind of touched a little bit on it in regards to density bonuses, trying to backfill. It's been my experience so far, my short time on the commission, is that density bonuses usually refer around people trying to look for all affordable housing, which is usually for the low income individuals. I guess ultimately what I'm looking at is we're putting these multifamily REACH, homes in low income neighborhoods. And the first thing, and you mentioned it, that the grid may not be as reliable as we would want it to be, or those challenges, and correct me if I was wrong by that statement, but what happens to those individuals if there is a power outage and it is 54 degrees outside and they have children? So they have no power because their whole multifamily unit is all electric. What happens to those individuals?
So to be clear, are you talking about an existing building or a new project?
New construction, new construction.
Okay.
Existing, I figure existing. I was okay with your response in terms of existing, but I'm looking at new construction. Councilman White, he's very proud of Ojai taking that step in regards to new projects and wants to have it go throughout the county. I'm looking at it, if there's a power outage, because California continues to have these flex alerts and continues to have these rolling blackouts, and because we don't technically produce really anything here in California, we kind of import it all. What happens to those individuals when there's a power outage? And we see that around, the high winds. SoCal Edison around Thanksgiving, 4 days, a few neighborhoods in East County was without power. So if they're all electric homes, what happens to those individuals?
Yeah,
How
certainly.
do they stay warm? That's ultimately what I'm trying to figure out. How do they stay warm if they have children? in an all electric property.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right, but the answer, of course, I understand your concern about power outages and so forth. And I haven't even talked about other potential things besides power outages and earthquakes and things that could turn off your gas system too. But that's not the point of your question. The good news is that multifamily new construction is really efficient. So it actually, the envelope itself is very comfortable. It's not to say that people won't get cold. I can't promise that. That's not what I'm here to do. But the good news is those units actually are going to stay a whole lot warmer than anything that was built before now, frankly, especially something that's not attached, because attached housing just is insulated by its nature. So how the county chooses to apply this, whether it's just to multifamily construction or just a single family or to everything, that's up to you to decide how it gets applied. But I would say that those challenges that exist when you're talking about power outages can be mitigated to some extent if you wanted to have a battery requirement. Solar is required already, so they have electricity on site. So they could run that in conjunction with a battery system if you wanted to provide that level of security and reliability. Those are opportunities that exist through technology. But the good news, like I said, is that the underlying energy efficiency of new construction, because of the energy code in the state of California, is actually pretty good.
I appreciate that. Now, in terms of a contingency plan, say now we have all electric multifamily, what is the contingency plan in the event of power outages? You kind of touched it, solar panels, battery storage, but what else is there as far as a contingency plan that goes?
Well, again, this is my belief based on what I've seen historically and moving forward, but the grid itself is going to become more reliable again. That's where it has to go, because we have to have electricity. Like, that's not something that's even in question at this point in where we are as a culture, as a society. So they're going to fix those problems that have already been identified. As I mentioned, we have the technology to do so. We have the money dedicated to do it. It's going to become more reliable again. So I'm less concerned if we're able to get through these next couple of years as we're electrifying everything with a couple of additional battery banks than I would be otherwise. And then I'm really looking forward to having vehicles that you can plug in and provide the battery backup on their own, but that's a whole nother topic.
We'll probably have to have you come and speak on our tech about that one. But I appreciate the presentation, and I look forward to getting some more information. And I'll just wrap up with some comments. I think it's an okay idea to be able to think about all electric, but at the same time, because it's still so new, it's very concerning for me. I think about, and you just made the comment that the grid will get better. Well, we've noticed the issues with the grid for years, and I haven't really seen any improvements. We continue to have problems with our grid. And I understand that new developments are more energy efficient, so that's a good thing. And for California being so advanced in that area, again, the concerns is in regards. The reality is that electricity is produced by natural gas. Natural gas produces electricity. And if we don't use natural gas, the alternative is coal. And we won't ever go that route. But at the same time, I want to ensure that it's not going to cause an undue burden on any individual, regardless of income level. And I believe when city council members, where it's only a body of 5 or 7 people making decisions on thousands of residents, that's concerning for me. Because where's the input? And special interest groups coming and saying, this is what we want, this is what the community wants. but they've only spoke to maybe 20 or 30 people is wrong. But again, I am more than willing to learn more information and speak with you more, and any information that you have, if you can please send it through Clay and then he can distribute it to all of us. But at this time, I'm very, very concerned by it, and trying to do that. And I understand we're looking years in advance, just like many other communities are. But it's concerning that we're trying to throw all of our ducks in electric as opposed to looking at different options. I get it. We want to step away from natural gas, but at the same time, it's like, is electric the right way? What if something else comes out that's better, that's cleaner, that's easier? But I'll just leave it at that. Again, Amy, I do appreciate the presentation and the dialogue that we were able to have right now. And I look forward to hearing the rest of my fellow council members. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you. And I do see hands up, so I'll call them in order. So I had Councilmember Ontiveros, then Clay Downing, then I have Councilmember Ramirez, and then Councilmember Baldwin. Go ahead.
Thank you very much for your presentation, Amy. I'll try to be as quick as possible. I am really looking forward to electrification. I tried doing it in my own home, and I live in a disadvantaged community. And although I agree with the cost, it's prohibitive. When I try to replace my gas water heater, I couldn't, because I couldn't afford it. And so I really was looking at the electric, and I just couldn't afford it. But I'm thinking and hoping, and my goal is to become electrified in my own home, that we, as technology increases, gets better, that it can be done. And especially providing a lot of education and incentivization for low-cost folks, because I think it should be a goal for all of us, because then we're helping society, and we're helping the climate, and we're helping each other, and having better health with less gas in the home. And so I'm really looking forward to that. And an answer to having more electricity, or microgrids and methane sequestration, and just we're using hydroelectric, we're using all kinds of different technologies. So it's not just solar versus coal, it's a bunch of technologies, and I'm glad that we're working on that also. And also just to ensure that language barriers, because we have all kinds of languages in our state. We have Armenian, we have Chinese, Mandarin and Cantonese, and other Vietnamese. My neighbors are Vietnamese, and of course, Spanish. So I really like the fact that we're working on all of this together, and that we're going to have a positive solution in the future. And I just think that this is amazing that we're able to get together, talk about this, and work on this. And thank you. Thank you very much for your work.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead, Clay.
So I wanted to jump in on one of the items that came up during the prior question and responses between Amy and the council. So the website explorer.localenergycodes.com is a very productive website. If this group is interested in it, you can look at housing reports specific to Ventura County, and it does go into the cost effectiveness associated with energy savings, which translates to GHG reductions and those sorts of things. So I would really recommend that the council members consider this as a really fantastic resource. I've also had it recommended to me by both liaisons with Southern California Edison and with the California Air Resources Board. So this is reliable, and it has studies specific to our housing types, our housing typologies, our housing by age cohort, and those sorts of things. So it is a good place to look, and it not only looks at things like energy sources, but it looks at things like duct sealing, it looks at cool roof, it looks like at all these different tactics that you can take to addressing these, and looks at the cost effectiveness associated with those. So I just wanted to emphasize that as a really great resource. So thank you, Amy, for recommending that to everyone that's listening.
Okay, thank you, Clay. So we have Councilmember Ramirez, and then Councilmember Baldwin.
You know, listening, one of the statistics, Amy, that I really just stands out, and it's written on the top of my paper, is just that 25% of all greenhouse gas emissions in California come from buildings. And I don't need a degree from, in policy to understand that then we need to really look at what are we doing in buildings, and that is where a chunk of the solution is. So I'm really interested to see what others, how looking at other cities, and really am grateful for a lot of the information that you bring to us. And, you know, I can't help but think about the toilets, you know, when that was a thing, when everybody was, when we were getting, you know, incentives and rebates to try, you know, to work on the cost to get everybody to swap out their toilets that were using a lot, like 5 gallons of flush versus now 1.5 and some even a half gallon. And it took some time, and it took some people time to think that we could get to that place. But look at where we are, not just in not just in new, but also in existing. Pretty much any bathroom you go to now has a water saving toilet. And so that's where we are now. We have, you know, you know, there's some people who can think about electric and right away get on. And then there's other people who it's going to take them some time to get on board. But the reality is that if 1/4 of all greenhouse gas emissions in California are coming from buildings, we absolutely have to address that if we're going to have a true solution for reducing greenhouse gas emissions in this county. We have to look at our buildings. And I also, the other thing that really sticks out to me too, Amy, is when you talk about how if we just focus on the new buildings, that's just a drop in the bucket. We have to look at existing buildings. So part of that, and I'm like I said, I'm really looking forward to going to explore, is to look at the costs. And as we look at it, know that that can't be why we don't go forward, is to say, oh, but it's going to cost too much. Because I have this discussion all the time around organic food, for example. It also costs too much not to make these changes. For example, I have a house in Santa Fe that we bought that already has it all hooked in for propane gas. Every time that truck comes in and fills up my tank, I pay $400. And here in the wintertime, it's 2, sometimes even 3 times to fill that propane tank. It wasn't that last year. It has gone up 40% in 1 year. And when I had that first tank come in, I knew, man, it hurts me. And I know that for other families, it hurts to get heat. So yeah, the cost will be more long-term to not have electric. How I wish I had electric. I wish I had electric in that house. And one day I will get electric in that house. So yeah, I mean, that's it. It's here. It's time. It's time that we really look at these things, and it's going to take some people longer to get there, but that doesn't mean we don't push forward. So that's what I have to say.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead, Councilmember Baldwin.
So 2 comments on earlier comments. One is that you can't run your gas appliances when you lose electricity because you can't ignite it. However, if you happen to have solar with a battery, you can, as I do and have. The other thing is with respect to Edison reliability, I've got 0 faith in it right now. They do seem to get a little better, but I've been able to run my house for a day and a half with the battery. So I think when people are getting solar, there ought to be a strong education part that encourages people to get batteries. I'm going to get a second battery. That's how much faith I have in Edison continuing to provide power to me so that I don't run out. And I'm going to add 6 more panels. So the power goes out, it will go out. Just a piece of background, when I worked for San Diego Gas and Electric going through college, one of the things I was responsible for was getting materials out to the line crews to fix stuff. And they fixed a lot of stuff, and drunk drivers and others hitting poles and taking power out is a common event. And nobody has any, you don't get to pick who's going to hit what pole. And we don't get to pick which wildfire is going to come along. It just happens, and just don't know. But I just, especially for everybody here, get battery with your solar and get plenty of battery. That's where I'm headed, and it works.
Okay, thank you. I do have a couple of comments and a question for you, Amy. So in terms of, I love the fact that there are incentives, and it sounds like it would be for people to switch over from gas, like a gas water heater, to electric. What are those kinds of incentives? Is it based on size, or is it based on income level for the individual and family?
So there's lots of different incentives, and I don't know them all, so you'll have to forgive me. But there are incentives both on for if you're converting from an old electric appliance to a modern electric appliance, because they're so much more efficient, encouraging that. That's in most places, but there's also those to convert from gas to electric. And yes, that's usually based on the size and or the efficiency of a new piece of equipment.
Okay.
So if you want to go with something that's, extra efficient, there's usually a little bit bonus for that because they are more expensive. And then there are layers or adders for certain income levels. So
And are these incentives available now throughout California?
they are not universal how much they are across California. So it depends on who your utility is, depends on a couple of other factors, including who you use as your contractor.
Okay. And then a second question I have is that in the communities, I know that we're talking about, buildings, and some of these applications that cities and counties are taking a look at would be for new construction. Does it matter where the utilities are underground, or is it restrictive to the utilities that are above? There's no restriction in that way?
No restriction, no.
Okay, kind of points back to then Councilmember Baldwin saying that, you can't figure out, what car is going to hit what pole. And I'm thinking that if it's underground, then there would be a better opportunity to move to electric overall. So just a thought there. If I don't see any other council members' hands up at this time, we can open it up for public comments from the public on this item. And so let's see if we have anybody that is wanting to speak. You can go ahead and raise your hand and or take yourself off of mute, and we'll give you a few minutes here to make a comment. So I do see a couple of people from the public, but I don't see any hands up. So, all right. So with that, then let's go ahead. Are there any other comments or questions from the members of the council for Amy? Yes, go ahead, Councilmember Garola.
So I just wanted to reaffirm that I basically don't have a lot of new comments, but I just wanted to reaffirm my same concerns that Vice Chair Chavez had, and for the community that I represent, that is a lot of the major concerns. So anyways,
Thank you.
Yeah.
And with that, there was one concern I have is that with some of these fires, and knowing that we've gone through fires throughout California, not just in Ventura and this Central Coast area, but I know that companies like Edison have been fined. And it seems to be that there's perhaps a pervasiveness of these wildfires being because of an electric spark. So are there those kinds of concerns, Amy, that your community is taking a look at in terms of what do we do to make ourselves more maybe fire resilience? At the same time, we're electrifying buildings. Is that something that you've taken and had like discussions with your community or within your groups?
So let me see if I understand your question correctly. Are you asking if the folks working on building decarbonization are also looking at grid reliability at large?
That and or fire resiliency. So, how do we make our structures so that they're less cause of, of really just overall being on fire versus, are there certain things that are those, switch offs and other things that prevent it from being worse of a fire than what it could possibly be.
So certainly fire is not my area of expertise, but I can say that there have been a number of local building code ordinances that I've seen in fire prone areas that address the fire resiliency of building design. And so, for example, many of the homes that were reconstructed post the Tubbs fire in 2017 in the Santa Rosa and outlying areas utilized what are called WUI standards. So we're dealing with the urban wildlife corridors, and even in town started using different construction elements around, for example, the base of the structure and adjacency of plants and things of that nature. So there are definitely things we can do in our structures to make them less likely to be entirely demolished during a wildfire scenario through building codes in particular, but I'm not sure that actually answers your question.
I think we'll get there somehow. All right, thanks. And then I see Councilmember Chavez and Councilmember Ramirez.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just real quick, I just want to say that I appreciate the discussion that is occurring right now amongst the council members. One thing that stood out to me, and I believe it was Councilmember Ramirez mentioned it, was that there are some people that are going to take some time. And I believe that is true. There are individuals that are going to have a little bit of a harder time of transitioning if you're forced to do it. But at the same time, we also have to recognize that, and she mentioned the cost increase for her second home. A lot of people are seeing an inflation increase. A lot of people don't have a second home, but the issues that we see, it's a cost factor. And Councilmember Ontiveros also made the comment that she couldn't do it right away of electrifying her home because of the cost factor. So, when we are making these decisions or recommendations or we're advocating, we also have to think about the cost factor. Not a lot of people have so much money that they can go ahead and take these steps. Rebates are very important. So educating the public on specific rebates, I think will be helpful, as well as the pros and cons of doing all electric. Again, it's a cost factor for me that concerns me. I don't have an issue with going electric, but I don't want an undue burden on my fellow residents, whether it's in my city or in the county. Some individuals have that luxury that they have money to be able to do that. Others don't. So I just wanted to make those comments. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yeah, thank you. So go ahead, Councilmember Ramirez.
It's interesting because it's a catch-22 in terms of it, or not even a catch-22, but rather it's when you ask Sylvia or council members Schnapp, I kind of wonder if what you were thinking about is how do we make ourselves more fire resilient as communities? And that's why we're on this council, essentially. For me, this is part of the reason we're having so many fires is that because we have more greenhouse gas emissions, that this is the new reality is that now, I know I'm not the only one, but whenever a Santa Ana wind comes, you kind of have that tension of, is this going to bring a fire? Before the Thomas fire, that wasn't even a thing. When I was a kid, we had Santa Ana winds, but it was never something that we considered. So in order to make ourselves fire resilient, we have to be thinking about what are the policies that we need to implement. There is going to be sacrifice. There is going to be change, but things are already changing. Things have already changed. We are here. And so that's us as a council to give recommendations. It really is going to be, how can we grow the solutions that are already there? How can we, make it where it's possible, reducing barriers for for many people to get there through education, through rebates, through all of these different things. But it also is, policies are about how do you change people's behaviors as a collective. How do we change people's behaviors? That's where policies come in, and they give incentives to do so, or punishments if you don't do it, right? I mean, it just depends on how we want to grapple with these different things. But it is one and the same. Fire resiliency and climate and dealing with climate change, it is one in the same. So every time we move forward and we're doing something at an individual level or as a collective level, at that collective level, we are making ourselves more fire resistant and resilient. That's how I think about when I purchase food. What am I purchasing? Am I part of the solution or am I part of the problem? I mean, from those small, tiny decisions to the larger decisions that we make on a daily basis.
So going back, Amy, when you had mentioned about my question regarding the building elements, it sounds like there's many more individuals and organizations that are wrapped up in these layers that would make it so that we could get to the greenhouse gas emissions of buildings. It sounds like it's, from the building materials group to architects to construction workers to everybody who's in on all of that. It sounds like many layers. Yeah, okay. Councilmember Chavez, you have your hand up?
One moment, Chair. I just wanted to mention that we're at a time right now where we can still make our 2 remaining agenda items without going over. I know we have at least one council member with a hard stop at 2. I just wanted to make
Okay,
the
so
council.
Councilmember, let's see. Councilmember Chavez, can you limit your point to a minute or so?
I apologize, Madam Chair. I forgot to put my hand down.
Oh, sorry. Okay. All right. Anyone else who wants to make a comment or question for Amy at this time? Thank you, Amy, for presenting wonderful information, very valuable. Thank you for all your work and dedication to this. And if there's anything that you'd like to continue sharing with the group, you can contact Clay. And if there is, even part of this PowerPoint presentation that could be available, that would be wonderful as well. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Thank you. So let's move on then to item 15 here, and that's the discussion and modification of temporary advisory committee, or TAC, of the VCCEC, including dissolution of the evaluation criteria TAC and modification of TAC membership. So Clay, do you want to lead us in that discussion?
Sure. There's no memo or items associated with this. If the council at this point would like to dissolve the evaluation criteria TAC and has determined that they did what they were asked to do, then that can happen. And we can move people onto a new TAC. So Councilmember Ferris is the only one of the 2 council members that are here now that were part of that TAC, but they would want to join an existing TAC. That's okay. We can just move them onto that membership. And then the other alternative would be at a future council meeting, we do have the ability to create a new TAC of some sort if we want to. And so we can figure those sorts of things. We can do part of that today. We could do only a limited part and then figure those out later. It's really up to your council to decide how you'd like to handle that.
Okay, so yes, Councilmember Chavez.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would be remorse if I didn't take this opportunity. I just want to thank council members Ferris and Kesley for their hard work. I did see the meeting from last month, a lot of great information, and I did review that document. A lot of great work and guidelines being created, and it was very reasonable. It wasn't anything too extravagant. It was realistic goals and guidelines. So I appreciate the work that both of you did on that TAC. And I'll wait if there's no further discussion, then I'll move from staff's recommendation to dissolve if there's no further discussion. Thank you.
Yeah, so any other comments from the council on this? Yes, Councilmember White.
Oh, I just have a question. Did we adopt what was recommended by that TAC, Clay?
We did not adopt it, but the group generally concurred to use it as a guideline going forward, and it's been posted and made available to the public. So the council is not locked into using those, which you might want to retain that sort of flexibility and autonomy. But the other part of it too was we didn't have the agenda posted at the time. It's basically an administrative error on my part on getting that. I thought the entire packet was up, but it apparently was only the agenda. So that's been remedied, and your council can move forward and make such an adoption should you choose to. But at the same time, there was kind of general concurrence amongst those who here who was a quorum of the council that felt like just accepting it and having it available for future use and having it posted to the website would be adequate.
Okay. I ditto what Councilmember Chavez said. Thank you to the two members of this committee who served on that TAC. I think you did a great job to come back to us very quickly with recommendations about what should be considered. So thank you so much for your work there. Any other comments or questions? Any questions from the general public as well? So you could either raise your hand or take yourself off of mute. We still have a few people from the general public on this call. All right, seeing none, so I'll go ahead and entertain a motion.
Chavez will move staff's recommendation of dissolve of the TAC.
Is there a second?
I'll go ahead and second it. I think we've done our job and provide the recommendation with an expectation that anything we do consider and bring forward to the board, we can use this evaluation criteria to help the board with their decision making. So happy to have done our job and happy to be dissolved.
All right, thank you. So motion's been seconded. Go ahead, play with the roll call.
Thank you. Councilmember White,
Yes.
Councilmember Ferris,
Yes.
Chair Schnapp,
Yes.
Councilmember Ramirez,
Aye.
Councilmember Ontiveros,
Yes.
Councilmember Garola,
Aye.
Councilmember Chavez,
Aye.
Councilmember Baldwin.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Okay, motion passes. Thank you. And in terms of the modification of TAC membership, that is to say that the two that served on this TAC could choose to go to another TAC. And do we need to revise then those memberships once they do?
And revising those would really be an internal mechanism of adding them to some of the shared folders and those sorts of things, but also making sure we're doing it as a body so that the communications are kept clear and so that we don't create any Brown Act violations. So that's why we want to make sure we do that at a public hearing and in a way that everyone understands exactly who's on what TAC at what time.
So Councilmember Ferris, is there a choice of a TAC that you'd like to move to?
I actually don't have any preference at this point. Clay, do you happen to remember what had been listed as like the next choice?
We didn't have a next one in the queue at this time. And that's something that I can give consideration and make a recommendation at the January meeting on if there's consideration of a new TAC that the group might consider forming to move into. Alternatively, if you have interest, I believe each of the TACs have adequate space that we could have membership. There's the agriculture TAC, which I believe has 3 people on it. The other issues TAC, I also believe has 3 people on it. And the transportation TAC has 2 people on it. So if any of those are of particular interest to you, you can choose to move into those, although any council member obviously can continue to do their own work, can prepare their own proposal to come to the rest of the council. So no one is required to. So if you want to wait until something comes up or even consider proposing your own TAC that you could pull people into out of other ones, or perhaps Councilmember Kessley, then that would be an option too.
Is Is it, I would say either deferring to the next meeting, which maybe then you can have an agenda item to where we can work with you to be
Mhm.
more specific. Maybe that's the best tack at this point, if
I
that's
think-
agreeable to the chair and the council.
That
I
is,
think
that
that's-
is very workable from a staff perspective.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think that's pretty reasonable.
Great.
Would you concur, the rest of the council members, as we can just wait till next month to take a look at this? Yeah, okay. All right, very good. All right, well, thank you. Thank you again for your work, Mitch, on all of that you and Councilmember Kesley did. Thanks. So let's move on then to item number 16. This is where council member have a place here on the agenda for comments and future agenda items. And so we'll reserve a few minutes here for that. The council member comments, updates, and discussion is item number A. And certainly with that is the upcoming meetings. We just have our January and February meetings identified. And so we need to set up the rest of the calendar that we'd like to have for our meetings, and then suggesting anything else that we'd want to take on as an agenda item in the future. So Clay, should we just take item number A first and then do the additional agenda items?
We can, anything that the council would like to discuss or recommend that staff try and work into additional agendas and come back for, we can do that. And as far as the calendaring of things for the remainder of this year, since the board calendar for 2022 is now available, staff will plan on bringing that back to your council at the next meeting.
Okay, so I see Councilmember Chavez hand up, Councilmember Ontiveros hand, and then Councilmember White.
Madam Chair, I was gonna ask about the calendar coming back next year so that we can adopt that, but Clay already asked that. But I would request that on a future agenda that we look into either doing a site visit of Gold Coast if they'll have the full council. So you all can experience what myself and Councilmember Baldwin did, or a simple presentation to the full council. And I'll allow staff to fit that in where they believe is appropriate. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Ontiveros?
Yes, I move to request that staff reach out to CFROG for a presentation at some point within the next couple of months. It doesn't have to be the next meeting. For CFROG to come and talk to us about what they're doing.
Okay, thank you. And then Councilmember White?
Yeah, just not so much for future, but kind of a report. I just want to report that the other issues TAC, which includes me and Dina and Florencia, did meet. We did communicate about things that we are looking at and intend to bring back to the full council. And those things include emissions from carbon dioxide emissions from buildings and other stationary sources, including both new and existing buildings. And then secondly, we intend to come back with proposed policies and programs regarding methane emissions, both from oil and gas operations and landfills, including those two predominantly. So we don't have anything specific to report, but those are the areas that we're looking at right now.
Okay, all right, thank you very much. Anyone else on the council? Okay, so then what we have going on is a couple of suggestions for either presentation or other speakers that we could bring in the next few agendas, and possibly a site visit. And then it sounds like we will also take on the 2022 calendar for our January meeting. Yes, go ahead, Clay.
Chair, Councilmember Ontiveros made her request in the form of a motion. So I
Oh,
was,
sorry.
it seemed like she might be waiting to hear if there's a second and if she'd like to take a vote on that. Although staff would be happy to look into that in the future too, but in the form of a motion, I just wanted to respect the request.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, is there a second to Councilmember Ontiveros's motion to bring Frog in for Sea Frog, sorry, in for a presentation? So
I'll
Councilmember
second
White,
the motion.
okay. All right, so motion has been seconded. Go ahead, Clay, with the roll call.
Okay, just one moment so I can get my ducks in a row here to make sure that I've keep up with everyone. Councilmember White,
Yes.
Councilmember Ferris,
Yes.
Chair Schnapp,
Yes.
Councilmember Ramirez,
Yes.
Councilmember Ontiveros,
Yes.
Councilmember Garola,
Aye.
Vice Chair Chavez,
Aye.
Councilmember Baldwin.
Yes.
Motion passes and staff will be happy to look into that. And we will do I will do my best to respect that within the next couple of months and get that on the agenda.
Okay, super. Yes, Councilmember White.
Thinking about things that would be good to have at a future meeting. And thinking about the conversations that have happened since Amy gave her presentation on reach codes and building electrification for new and existing buildings. And of course, where's the money going to come from is the big question. And Amy indicated, yes, there are incentives and money. There's money out there to help these things. Maybe it would be a good idea if we could get a presentation from staff on what's out there, what monies are available to Ventura County residents who want to do electrification.
Staff would be happy to look into that. And in particular, I think our staff from 3C Ren might know something about that. And Amy also mentioned that Switches On campaign, which is relatively new. So it's an emerging one that's going to be around for a little while. And we can reach out to that organization as well. And they might be a good clearinghouse for that sort of information. So thank you. Staff will work on that.
Okay, thank you. And then Councilmember Ramirez.
So recently I was sitting in my car and listening to NPR, and who should I hear on getting interviewed is Councilmember Phil White. So I don't think he's mentioned it in this venue, but he is the curator of a exhibit that's currently showing at the Ojai Valley Museum called Ojai Warming. So I wonder if we could, or those of us who are interested, could get a guided tour of this exhibit. So, and congratulations, and that was a really wonderful interview.
Well, Sylvia, can I comment on that?
Yes, go right ahead.
Yes, I'm living in Ojai and associated with a museum, curated an exhibit called Ojai Warming, Flora and Fauna in the Time of Climate Change. And it talks about rare plants and animals in Ventura County, and also about climate change causes, effects, and solutions. And I think it's a great exhibit. We just acquired a mountain lion, a taxidermy mountain lion, which is very spectacular. And would encourage you all to come see it. The museum's open Friday, Saturday, and Sunday afternoons. And I would be happy to give a personal tour to anybody. So yeah, come check it out. It's very cool.
Congratulations. Thank you. All right. So with that, then it's 1:50. Are there any other questions or comments on this part of the agenda? No? Okay, so we go on to item number 17, which is adjournment of this meeting. Thank you so much. We've come to the close of our calendar year 2021. We just were established this year, so I want to wish everybody a happy holiday, safe travels, and we'll see you then January the 18th. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all.
Bye. Thanks.
Have a great year.
Thank you.
Happy holidays.
Holidays.